On the road, in the gym, at a coffee house. No matter where you listen, this is Prevention Perk. I'm Steve Miller with Mid-America PTTC. It's time to perk up our prevention efforts. My guest today is Seth Dewey, who serves as a project coordinator for substance misuse grants at the Reno County Health Department in Hutchinson, Kansas. He is a founding member of the Kansas Recovery Network, a grassroots harms reduction group, and has recently been appointed to the Governor's Behavioral Health Services Planning Committee. His unique lived experience as a person in long-term recovery demonstrates that people do recover, and hope is available for those who live in active addiction. Seth is currently pursuing his bachelor's degree in organizational leadership and development from Fort Hays State University, where he was also elected to the Student Senate. Hello, Seth, and welcome to Prevention Perk.
Hey, Steve, thank you for having me.
Well, this is exciting. You are a go-getter. Just reading your bio there made me want to go take a nap, so you're a busy fella. First thing I really want to know, though, is we talked about substance use prevention here on the Prevention Perk. We also talk about mental health awareness and mental health promotion. But how did you get interested in prevention work? What was your path?
Well, like you mentioned in my bio there, I'm a person in recovery myself. And so when I started down my journey of recovery and started learning that the drugs and the alcohol were only really a small portion of my problem, I thought about the potential points of intervention that happened that weren't there in my youth, I should say, and also the undiagnosed mental health situations growing up, like undiagnosed ADHD, and then also not being able to talk about trauma that happened as I was a child. So all of those things compounded really piqued my interest when I got into recovery about, wow, what can we do? What can I do to help others? And it kind of has evolved into what I'm doing now.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The funder of this project, along with all the other products of the Mid-America PTTC, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. SAMHSA's working definition of recovery defines recovery as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. Learn more about SAMHSA's focus on recovery and support at samhsa.gov/find-help/recovery. When I heard you present, it was at the Kansas Prevention Conference recently. You talked about being hired into your position, and I found it intriguing and invigorating and exciting to hear somebody talk about how your lived experience was amongst your skill set. Can you talk a little bit about how that evolution came to be something that you felt like, I can put this on a resume?
Yeah, absolutely. It was very interesting. So in about 2017 was when I started my journey of recovery, which of course began with me stopping my use of substances chaotically, because for me there was only one way of use, and that was chaotic. But in 2018, we had a rash of overdose deaths in Reno County, and me and some friends of ours, we were so angry and we were so upset, and we felt like there was things that could have been done. And so we started procuring naloxone and educating our community, educating people in the recovery community about how to use it, how to spot the signs of an overdose. And the community response was unreal. Like, everybody was so amazed at what was going on, and that there was steps that could be taken to combat this. And so we started getting invited to community coalition work, prevention work. And in the process of this, I met individuals in the public health department that were doing a community needs assessment. And in that, I started learning, oh, wow, we're engaging in public health, by providing services to populations and families who don't always have those services. And that's kind of when I started realizing, like, oh, what I have is not something, and what we all have in recovery is something that not everybody has. People go to school for years and years and years to learn skills that they read about, right? And here we have a very unique skill that we didn't read about, we lived. And not only did we manage to live, we managed to navigate a system that is extremely difficult to navigate. Um, and so when I started to realize that, and also realize that the community needed that perspective, I was able to realize, hey, this is something that we can really offer. This is a skill set to offer. And so that's when I started really putting it out there as such, that this is something that we should be proud of, and we should definitely offer our services in trying to give back, like you said.
Yeah, I can imagine as a person in recovery how you kind of burn your life down, and then you find this, this new direction in life. But to be able to embrace it in a way like this is a skill set is also helps address the shame or the stigma that goes along with persons that have had a history with substance misuse.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to tackle it from that perspective. Um, it was really important to me that the sheriff that actually I was in his correctional facility here in Reno County. His name was Randy Henderson, and he was so influential on me. Him and the programs director, Mike Hill, at that time were so influential because not only did they see me at some of the worst times of my life, but they made opportunities available. It was in jail that I learned about Oxford houses and learned about other forms of recovery. And I learned about peer mentors. And therefore, I had a direction at that last point, that last time that I was incarcerated. I had direction for the first time upon when I got out to do something different. And that was so impactful. And so the sheriff one day was the one who called me and said, "Hey, Seth, there's going to be a job posting coming up at the health department doing a lot of the things that you're really passionate about." And I said, "Randy, it's a county job. What am I supposed to put on my resume? My felonies?" And and he actually said, "Well, Seth, I think actually for this one, that's kind of what they're looking for, is they want someone with lived experience. And in that, they realize that they're some of the applicants might have a criminal background. So he said, I just encourage you to look into it." And so he's the one who was so instrumental in helping me realize that that was a skill set.
Yeah, that's a really great story. Also, from the standpoint that oftentimes what ends up in the headlines or on the 6 o'clock news is how the police are doing this or that or the other, and you're demonstrating they saw something in you. The sheriff of your county actually thought, "Hey, this guy could actually do something with himself if he was given the right direction or the right encouragement," and that's a great testimony right there in and of itself.
Yeah. And like you said, it also in that we're reducing stigma on two fronts. The
Yeah.
stigma that sometimes we as individuals in recovery have about ourselves, but also stigma about societal interpretations of police and individuals who have used drugs. So it's kind of a cool um, little story in that particular one.
Well, in your bio, we talked about the fact that you were a founding member of the Kansas Recovery Network, and then also that you are on the Governor's Behavioral Health Services Planning Committee. What does that entail? Talk a little bit about how you're working with upper levels of government in your state.
Well, what's really neat about that is, and this is where I have to give a huge shout out to Charlie Bartlett with the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services, with KDADS, because KDADS has a whole this Governor's Behavioral Health Services Planning Committee or Council has a whole section in there where they want to always incorporate individuals with lived experience, because they're making recommendations about substance use. They're making recommendations about behavioral health services, where funding goes, what kind of programs they're going to get behind, what kind of action is taken on the legislation, the next legislative session, and things like that. And so it's more than just talking and saying, oh, we're doing these things for these people, right? They're saying, no, come to the table and have a say in it. So it's very, I'm very blessed to have been able to do this. Unfortunately, I feel bad because when I was appointed, I had almost the rest of my year booked out, so I had to miss a few of the meetings. But fortunately, now we're starting to really make some interesting traction, particularly in the way that peers are going to be used in the state of Kansas going forward, not necessarily having to be singularly in the spot where we always traditionally think of them at.
So can you talk a little bit
treatment.
about that, where you think that you'll be headed as peers in the state?
Well, I mean, we're already starting to see it a little bit more, but typically a lot of times we see peer mentors being utilized through just treatment options or mental health and substance use treatment places. But if you look around the country, some of the most effective programs have been when they've embedded peer mentors and peer recovery coaches and peer support services in like hospital settings. That way they can talk to an individual right after a non-fatal overdose, right? Imagine that. You come to and you got somebody who's lived it. You've got someone who's experienced the same thing to say, hey, I know how much this is not fun right now, but here's what worked for me. Is there anything that I can help you with? Rather than having a nurse or a doctor who means well and is trying to offer you the best services that they can, but they can't give you that heartfelt personal experience, you know? Another one is like peer mentors in the health department, peer mentors that are riding along on crisis calls with law enforcement. There's no end to the possibilities, because if we think about it, there's a lot of areas where there should be peer support services implemented right alongside day-to-day operations.
Now, is peer support services in your state, is this a newly evolving? Has it been around a while and it's now getting some traction? What's that look like for Kansas?
So in Kansas, it's been around for a while, but I feel like in Kansas, as a lot of times we're a little behind. I mean, sometimes we're behind to catch up on the latest phase of the cool music or the cool clothing, right? And so the same is true with some other things as well. But it's not necessarily out of, um, uh, just because we're just behind the times. It's just things move slower, right? Sometimes there's not always as much of a statement of need that's determined we move at such a pace. That's what I feel is more like it. But we've had individuals like I said already, Charlie Bartlett, who has really stuck with this peer thing for many, many years and has worked to build this strong peer support in Kansas, but now really pushing it to get it out of the traditional confines of what it's been looked at before.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. A podcast is like a breakout session from your daily routine. It's a unique way to perk up your prevention efforts. We'd like to hear from you. Please send your comment, topic, or guest suggestion to midamericapttc@gmail.com. In some regards, harm reduction's misunderstood, from the ground up. Parents to people that work in the field, that they're not quite sure exactly where that fits. But I think that for somebody has lived experience to carry the torch and that conversation about harm reduction is invaluable.
Yeah.
You're in the trenches, so to speak.
Yeah, and most harm reduction has actually been done by individuals in recovery, because we're the ones like we've talked about who know the what works and what doesn't. And we also know, oh man, when you get to this particular point in the stages of change, right? Like whether you're just contemplating change or pre-contemplation, there's certain things that you go through that your mind is that you're trying to feel your way through. And so having someone that's there to walk with you and hold your hand and not tell you where to go, but just as you go by on the path with this individual to point to the road sign on the side of the road and say, oh, hey, here's an option. Oh, if you turn at this juncture, you know, it's going to lead you here. And this one, I really like this path. You know, harm reduction meets people where they're at without leaving them there. And you're right, it does get misunderstood. And I think a lot of times it gets so misunderstood because of the politicizing of substance use, and drugs in general. But yeah, it's harm reduction definitely plays a part. It definitely is best enacted when it's individuals in recovery, or sometimes even individuals that are still using, even are the ones that I get my most valuable insight on, you know, because they let me know what's going on that street level and what individuals need in our communities.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, what kind of efforts are involved with the Kansas Recovery Network? What are some of the things that you guys do as part of that collective body?
Yeah. So the Kansas Recovery Network, we first started, like I said, back in 2018. It was me and a few other friends who we were really sad. A bunch of our friends had passed away from overdoses. There was there an overdose death is preventable. It's always preventable. And so that's when we decided to get Narcan and naloxone available, to make sure it was at least in all of the recovery houses in our area. And then we gave the trainings to individuals. And like I said, the community started to buy in. And then it became, oh, wow, this is bigger. So we started doing street level naloxone distributions and trainings. We would go to the street corners or in parks, tell everyone, hey, we're going to be here for a couple hours. Come get some naloxone, come get a training. There's also hygiene products, toothbrushes, toothpaste, you know, all the basics of wound care kits, not just naloxone, right? It's just whatever individuals might need. And then in 2020, because at first we were called Addicts Against Overdose. And once we learned more about the stigmatizing language and things like that, we changed it to the Kansas Recovery Network. We got our 501c3, and since then we're getting more into the peer navigation services, where not only do we offer these supplies to individuals, we also work with other organizations in our community, like the Domestic Violence Center, the shelter, the Oxford houses, and other recovery efforts that are going on in the community to make sure that we're not just giving individuals the tools they need to be safe, but we're also giving them the resources that worked for us as well.
Yeah, that's great. As you're talking about that, what came to mind, have you ever had any interactions with the Alliance for Drug Endangered Children?
Oh, so
DEC?
DEC, yes. So I know that Rise Up Reno, one of the amazing prevention coalitions here in Reno County, they just got the DEC grant here this year. But yeah, I mean, as far as us partnering in any sort of way, currently we don't have any formal partnership, but I'm sure that now that Rise Up Reno got that, we will be partnering with them.
Yeah, that'd be great. You know, that's there's nothing new under the sun, regardless of whether you're talking about substance use prevention or you're talking about drug endangered children. They all work under a model where you're trying to do some kind of an intervention. And decrease the consequences that happen to children that grow up in those environments. And so I would think that there would be a touch point there for the work that you're doing. And yes, I did know that they are part of that the grant that they received. They're going to do some pretty cool stuff, I think, in the state of Kansas over the next few years. So
Yeah.
that'll be exciting to see come out of it. So we've talked a little bit about the fact that you're a person with lived experience in recovery, that you also have done a lot of stuff to help harm reduction. What's your involvement like with primary prevention, like that early onset of like preventing substance use amongst the teen audience? Does that
Well,
resonate with you as a person in recovery? And I don't know if you have children or not, but do you think, wow, this is really something I've got to reframe in my mind? How am I going to address this as my child gets older?
absolutely. So it's funny because back in 2019, before I was even working with um, the health department, I had gotten involved in, at the time it was Communities That Care, and now they're Rise Up Reno. Um, got involved in going to their coalition meetings and being heavily involved in the prevention work there, because I know that while harm reduction and recovery efforts are amazing, we also need to be making sure that we're also giving children the information to know the dangers of substance use, right? Knowledge is power, but it's only power if we use it. And in order for individuals to use it, they also have to have a wide variety of that knowledge. And so when we talk to the kids, because kids are smarter than we give them credit for, when we talk to the kids about not only the substances, but also some of the societal things. I mean, look at how big tobacco has targeted kids, and we see the same strategies being used by in substances, right? So I think once we arm kids with the information about how sometimes they're the easy target, it can almost make them upset and move them to action just in that. And I think that's a cool way of presenting it. Plus, also letting them know that their voice is so powerful, and that's what I love about Rise Up Reno, because they have a youth leadership program that is just amazing. And you can see these kids and the things that after they come back, like from the CADCA conference, they come back with all these ideas. And like last year, they came back and they were like, we need to do more about educating people about Narcan and how to use it. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is so cool, right? So the two go hand in hand. Harm reduction and prevention, they go hand in hand. It's just a matter of a lot of times how we frame it in our conversations. One of the things that is important to me about prevention is I have a child, right? He's going to be 5 in January, and he's my little game changer. He changed everything in my perception on everything. But with his daddy having a diagnosed substance use disorder, that means there's a genetic predisposition for him. So I want to make sure that he has the knowledge about substances. I want to make sure he has a great got to make sure he's involved with Rise Up Reno, I'm sure, and knowing about that. But also I want to make sure too, that if something does happen in his life, that he understands that it's not a sentence. And I want to make sure that there's also the treatment and recovery options, the harm reduction options, because if we can create that comprehensive level of support, whether it's from prevention to harm reduction to treatment and recovery, then we're going to be setting our communities up for success.
It's interesting when you talk about the kids for today. They are so sophisticated. I think about how dumb I was at that time, and they are, but the technology they have at their fingertips, the communication models that they interface with, and they have friends all over the globe. There's just a different world. And it's great when I hear somebody say that a coalition has some youth involvement in it. I remember it was a few years ago, I was at a conference and they had, I don't remember the exact ages, but I think it was a senior in high school, a sophomore, and an 8th grader. And they were all talking about the different entry points into the coalition work that they were doing. And this 13-year-old eighth grader, I guess that's probably 13 or 14-year-old eighth grader, she asked everyone, there were 72 people in the room, and she said, how many of you have youth on your coalition? And 4 people raised their hands. And she very innocently, maybe she set us up, I don't know, she said, what's wrong with the rest of you? She said, my friends really want to know how we can help our peers, but we don't know the information unless you tell us. And the only way you can tell us is if you involve us. And I thought, that should be a paid for message right there. But I find that that's a common denominator amongst young people today, that they really want to be involved in their community, but also from the standpoint of trying to help their peers. I think that's why Teen Mental Health First Aid really had an audience, or Mental Health First Aid, because peers want to help their struggling peers in that realm. And I know that's not how we thought when I was in high school. That has changed a lot. So it's exciting to hear that Reno County is including youth at the table, because I think they are out there. If they understand what it is that they're needed for, I think they're hungry to make a difference in their community.
Yep.
Your community, but it's their community.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Well, I also wanted to know, I don't know if you're thinking about tomorrow or not, but you said that you were elected to the student senate at the university that you attend. Are you got your eyes set on a political venue in the future?
Yes. I mean, I feel like that's one of the best ways that we can help influence systems level change is by individuals running for local and state and national office, especially with individuals in recovery, offering that perspective in their communities. What that looks like, I'm not exactly sure as of right now, but it is definitely something that's on my mind.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The SAMHSA Harm Reduction Framework is the first document to comprehensively outline harm reduction and its role within the Department of Health and Human Services. The framework will inform SAMHSA's harm reduction activities moving forward, as well as related policies, programs, and practices. There is a link in our show notes to a free download of this resource, or search SAMHSA Harm Reduction. Well, before we get away from one another, I'm curious, you're kind of the sage on the stage for this episode. Is there anything we didn't talk about, or is there something that you want the audience to think, say, or do before we get away?
I want everyone to remember that many times, especially when we talk about recovery, we talk about these issues with substance use, that we tend to think that someone else will do it. Or we might ask, well, why isn't this being done? In those moments, I hope that everyone remembers to not just wait for the authority on the issues to do things. Kansas Leadership Center, I love their programs. And one of the things that they always say is that leadership is an activity, not a position. And so when I remember when I heard that, it was so empowering to me, because so many times we wait for permission to act. And a lot of times we don't need to do that. We just need to do it. And when others see us doing it, then they too are like, oh yeah, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is right. And sometimes those in authority, the position of authority, don't even know the way to go. And so when they see someone else take action or speak up on an idea, then it actually can direct their influence as well.
My guest on this episode has been Seth Dewey. You'll be able to find a link to connect with him in our show notes. Thanks, Seth, for being a guest here with us today.
Thank you so much, Steve.
And thank you for listening to Prevention Perk, a podcast from Mid-America PTTC. To learn more about our innovations, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under Your PTTC or the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.